Charles II had received Tangier as part of the dowry for his wife, and it had been an English colony for about 20 years. And not many people know that, but perhaps not surprisingly, it didn't prove to be a terribly profitable colony. And in 1684, Charles actually abandoned it. But what it did mean is that a couple of the regiments of the Royalist Army were hard men. They were used to, dare I say it, dealing with natives. And again, I would perhaps draw the analogy of the way the paras in Londonderry handled the civilian population on Bloody Sunday during the Troubles in Ireland. Again, you've got this military with contempt for the civilian. Anyway, the battle, such as it was, ended. The Royalist artillery did do great damage to the rebels even before they turned and fled. But it was then that the carnage really began, that the Royalist army chased the rebels, and like so many battles of the time, it was during the rout that most of the casualties were caused. Something like maybe 300 rebels died in the battle, maybe 1,000 are believed to have been cut down in the pursuit, which gives you some idea of the situation. That's a picture of a Royalist regiment, cavalryman of the time. So on his horse there. Something like, well, before going to that, as I say, about 1,000 are believed to have been killed. One of the reasons we're so vague is that they were still finding bodies amid the growing corn a couple of months later at harvest time. So there was never a full tally of the number of bodies that were recovered. Something like 500 prisoners were taken at the battle. Again, nobody really quite knows, because some of them were summarily executed on the battlefield. But something like 500 of them were crammed into Western Zoyland Church, which you see here. Now, if you imagine 500 men being herded into Blagden Church, which is about the same size, you'll get some idea of the conditions that may have accrued there. I mean, obviously no toilets or anything like that, and not pleasant. Many people wounded probably, and clearly not a pleasant place to be. The countryside was then scoured for rebel fugitives. Again, a lot of rape, pillage, and general nastiness taking place among the population. This time from a particular regiment that had been transferred across from Holland, that arrived at the time and were doing the locking up operations. Very unpleasant to be in that part of the country at the time. But what could be quite interesting is these rebels. I mean, who were they? What made them rebel? A lot of them were captured, as I say, after the battle, either immediately after or subsequently, including the Duke of Monmouth himself, who was taken to London, pleaded for his life with his uncle, the king, but was executed on Tower Hill a few days later. And this is a contemporary print of his execution, which was bungled, but I won't go into details of that. There is a lot of documentation about the rebels. A lot of it doesn't match up. There are a lot of lists that don't come together, but what I'm about to give you is a picture which is broadly in line with general consensus. The most comprehensive list of the rebels came from a document called the Monmouth Roll, which is a compilation from the returns of all the known or suspected rebels, on which there is about 2,600 names. Some of them came from Devon, about 500 of them came from East Devon. About 300 came from Dorset, but 1,800 odd names were from Somerset. Although frustratingly, the lists from North Somerset, where we are missing. And hence we have no list from that source of the names of the people from our part of the world who participated, which really is very frustrating. What it does show, though, is in geographical terms, the rebellion was very localised, mainly because of the effective countermeasures that the authorities took to keep it hemmed in, to stop them recruiting wider than their line of march. Now, what I would say is the list, of course, only includes people who were found out, those that were captured, whatever. If you think about it, after the battle, it's going to be the younger, fitter men who get away more readily. It's probably going to be the farm workers who are, again, more used to the countryside, more used to going through fields and so on and so forth. And it's much more likely to be the local men, the men who were within, say, 20 miles of home, who were able to escape and get back to their native villages. So the official figures, I would repeat, are the people who got captured, and therefore may not be a representative sample. Certainly, the whole idea, again, of it being a pitchfork rebellion is not borne out by the facts that a lot of the men who took part in it were men of the town, including weavers, as I've got an illustration here for the time. Taunton, as I think I said, was very much a textile town at the time. There was a lot of weaving, cloth finishing, and so on and so forth. That's where its major wealth lay. And a high proportion of the men in the rebel ranks were actually from Taunton itself, or the area immediately round about it. So of the known names, well over 500 are from the Taunton area. As I've already suggested, the rebels were very often religious dissenters, and that was their motivation for joining. And a lot of them were, by the standards of the day, middle-aged. You normally expect rebels to be the young men, the headstrong, rush of blood to the head when the recruiting sergeant comes into the village. Many of these men were married men with families. They were not the very rich, they were not the very poor, they were the weavers, they were the small merchants, they were the shopkeepers, they were the yeoman farmers. They were the yeoman farmers rather than the day labourers, shall we say. They were people who got something to lose. And therefore, one can well say that they believed really strongly in the cause that they were fighting for. And I think they deserve that recognition. It's also interesting that one of the commentators has highlighted that there are relatively few families that contributed more than one of their members to the ranks of the rebels. In other words, there is some evidence, no, not put it further than that, there's some evidence that families were hedging their bets, that they sent off one of the sons or one of the brothers to the war, but they didn't send the whole family. That it wasn't 100% commitment, that they were hedging their bets. As I say, towns were very much represented. In addition to Taunton, Frome, Lyme Regis, there were a lot of people from there. And there were certain villages that feature particularly strongly in the list. And you're talking some places where perhaps a quarter of the male population or even more joined the rebels and marched away with them.
Naughty boys. It's
worthwhile, again, it's a point I've already made, but it's worth saying again, that there were very, very few of the gentry, the squires, what you might term the natural leaders, the people who Monmouth really had to attract if he was going to make the rebellion work. Right. Those captured then, as I'm sure most of you will know, had to face the bloody assizes, as they were later termed, and Judge Jeffreys.
Well, why are we all at home then when you could have been there?
King James hated nonconformists, he hated Republicans, and Jeffreys came down to the West Country with a full remit to really make an example of them, to teach them a really severe lesson. If anybody had the temerity to challenge the power of the divinely appointed King of England, then they were in for a hard time. The assizes started at Dorchester in September, and something like, at that stage, 1,400, maybe 1,500 men were in various prisons up and down the West Country awaiting trial. Some were in actual prison, some were in makeshift places of detention. Overcrowding, poor conditions meant that the death rate from disease and so on was really quite high already, that they weren't facing execution.
What's your name?
Judge Jeffreys, on his first day, tried 98 rebels. Now, by all accounts, supposedly the due course of justice was effected. How on earth you can carry out 98 trials in one day for men on trial for their lives is something that nobody has been able to explain. There aren't any records as to how he achieved it. People were very much encouraged to plead guilty, insofar as if you pled not guilty, the chances were you would be found guilty and then taken out immediately and hanged, which is probably a fairly good incentive for pleading guilty. If you did plead guilty, there was a fair chance of getting what at the time may have been seen as a mercy, which was a passage to the West Indies to be transported as a convict. Again, it's not necessarily a better fate than being hanged, I suspect. But at Dorchester, they tried 300 men over 5 days, of whom 74 ended up executed, and the rest transported or pardoned. The sentence for treason, as you obviously will all probably know, was pretty awful. High treason, it was hanging, drawing and quartering. I won't go into the gory details.
Well, thank you.
The assizes took place in those 6 places. The picture there is Taunton Castle, where it was the last but one. And the nearest obviously to us was Wales, just down the road where we all go shopping. But that's a plaque actually in Taunton, commemorating the events there. This is a contemporary playing card, which the whole pack illustrated various aspects of the rebellion. This is a card illustrating the actual trial with Judge Jeffreys in the chair in the middle. There were 5 judges who carried out the trials, and of course the clerks and so on in the foreground suggest very strongly that due process was carried out, which on the sheer numbers just cannot be true. In Wells, the trials took place in the Guildhall, which was down the middle of what is now the Market Square. So if you look there, that's the entrance to Cathedral Close. That's the fountain at the modern entrance to the square. So that's there. Okay. And so the actual building ran down the middle of what is now a car park. And that's what the building looked like, with open colonnades at the bottom, which was filled in with barricades when they were actually holding trials and things. And the prisoners were actually kept in the cloisters of the cathedral before they were brought across there. A lot of the... Can somebody kill that